I've seen about 6 of these watches in my life. You guys had one recently, but I've never seen this paper. And this, to me, this paper is actually more interesting than the watch, because it talks about it talks about a time.
Why Rolex? Where's the name come from?
It doesn't come from anywhere. You have to understand when it was invented in 1908. It was a time when newspaper distribution became nationwide, and so it was now possible to have a brand that you could sell that brand. So you look at companies, you look at around that period, look at all the names, the companies. Look at Kodak, look at Bovril, look at Oxo, Castrol. They mean nothing, but they're easily pronounceable, and they differentiate you from the other people. And crucially, they're all making a generic product. They're making a product that lots of other people are making. But this is how you define yourself against those other people. So he knew that Wilsdorf and Davies was never going to be a name on the face of a watch. Now, you could say, well, Patek Philippe is never going to be the name on. He figured it. You wanted something small, you want something people can instantly remember. And it just so happens that it sounds the same in every language. It doesn't mean anything in any language. There's no history behind it. There is some people have said, oh, it's shortened for horlogerie exquisite. It isn't, because if you spell horlogerie, there is no R-O-L. It's horlogerie. It's H-O-R-L-O. It's horology exquisite, but that doesn't make any sense. So it's a made-up name. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. I could ask you, what does Kodak mean?
You know the name. But I like the fact that you say it's the same in every country, which is very true. Yeah. It's not difficult to, And there was obviously a lot of thought that went behind it, but yeah.
I thought it was a whisper of a fairy or something. Is that
Pardon?
not true?
So what?
On the upper deck of an omnibus being driven through London. The fairy alighted on his shoulder and whispered the word Rolex in his ear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've all
always learn things.
we've all seen Peter Pan. Yes. Was Tinkerbell, was it? Yeah. Possibly, yeah. Because J.M. Barrie was in London at the same time, writing Peter Pan. That could well have been, But no, my belief is that it means nothing. And that's crucial, that it means nothing. Anybody else?
It surprises me because RAF pilots still, the last I knew, they were using Rolex as a way of defining a mission shift. So they've got an attack point and they'll say, well, Rolex the mission, move to define distance. And the ones I spoke to denied it had anything to do with the watch brand, but it must be because they wouldn't invent that name. I just wondered.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah. Common
Yeah.
pilot. I'll check that again.
Never been a pilot, so...
But the boy size, that was popular with our...
Pardon?
With the boy size, that was popular with
Well, we call it a boy size now, but this was at the start of from the middle of the 30s up until the end of the Second World War. This was a man's watch. This was the standard size that men wore.
What is that, 36 or 31?
It's about 32. It's a 32 millimeter. Yeah. Oh, do you want to put it on the screen?
Actually, I can
Yeah.
put them all on the
Yeah.
screen. Jane, if you turn around, then we can talk about. I want to ask you, what's the significance with the tourbillon on this watch?
It's not. It's I talk about it in the book, so obviously you haven't read the book.
I can't read, James.
That's big enough pictures. It's very simple. Where is it? Oh, of course, you've got it there.
There.
Well, no, the best way to show is to pop the back off, and then put the watch under the screen with the back off. It's loose. Yeah, I checked beforehand. Okay. In the 70s, Rolex had a problem with their ladies' watches. And this is something that's not well known, but the ladies' two-tone Datejust is the most single popular Rolex watch they sell. You know, everybody thinks, oh, must be the Submariner or the Daytona. No, those are actually fringe models. The problem they had in the late 60s, early 70s was that women who wore the Lady Datejust on a bracelet tended to wear it like a bangle rather than as a bracelet. It was loose on the wrist. So what happened when you move your wrist was that the watch stayed in position. And that meant it didn't wind. And this was a real problem for them because clients kept coming back to the store or to Rolex themselves and saying, my watch has stopped. So Rolex decided that they embarked on a program to make a brand new movement for ladies' watches and to make that movement much more efficient. And they did this by increasing the jewel count, by new Teflon-coated reversers. They did a number of things to make the watch much more efficient. The problem was, how do you test whether a watch is efficient or not? The only way to do it is to wear it. But how do you know how much it's wound up if you're wearing it? You know, Rolex watches don't have power indicators. How do you know how much it's wound up? So what they did was they took the new ladies' movements and mounted them inside a man's watch. But what they then did, flip it over now, so we look at the dial side. Okay, what they did was brilliant. They linked they put a small arrow here on top of the winding barrel. And then they linked the winding barrel to the date wheel. Here you can see the teeth. So what happens was that, see, there are 8 spots there on this. As the watch is worn and the winding barrel goes round, it moves this indicator. Each of these represents 1 hour of winding time. Once it hits that, it moves the tooth there, which moves the date. So you can look at it and know, so every date movement on there represents a full 8 hours of winding time. And then the arrow here is the balance of the winding time. So if that's moved 3 times, that's 18 hours, and it's moved 4 here, so that's 22 hours that they've got for wearing the watch for, say, 6 hours. It was a brilliant idea. It worked perfectly, but these were worn by guys who worked in the R&D department. The weird thing, of course, is that the date doesn't work as a date. It only works as part of the winding indicator. So you can't set the date on this watch. It's purely a prototype. It was never meant to leave the factory. But it's the kind of weird shit that I love. Now, I love about this is everybody knows that the 6150 was the first Explorer in 1953. No, it wasn't. This is 1935 Oyster Explorer. So and the interesting thing is Rolex didn't register the name Explorer until 53, but they had actually been using it for almost 20 years beforehand. You look like you want to say something, Spencer.
Yes. I want to ask, how did you actually, and in the 25, 30 years I've known, what was your first period where you got into watches, and what was your first watch?
Bizarre as it may seem, I had no interest in watches 40 years ago. I owned 2 watches, and I was interested in Leica M cameras and old Mercedes. That was what I collected. I got married. My wife had never owned a watch. She saw a friend's vintage watch and loved it. So I said, well, I'll buy you a vintage watch for our first anniversary. I did. And she reciprocated by buying me a vintage watch. And the vintage watch she bought me was a Harwood. Can I have one?
I know a man who's got
Yeah.
4.
Yeah. And I have a background in archaeology, and I get interested in stuff. Obsessed might be a better word. So I wanted to know about Harwood. It was the first automatic wristwatch, and it was developed in England. And I wanted to know as much as I could about it. So I did some research, and he was kind of the anti-Wilsdorf. He was the exact opposite of Hans Wilsdorf, in that he was a watchmaker, pure and simple. He had no idea about marketing, and he developed the watch, but he screwed it. The business thing was screwed up massively. But when I started to wear mine, I realized it actually wasn't very efficient. The thing about this Harwood, with a lot of the early automatics, was there's no way of manually winding it. You have to shake it or wear it continually. I got interested in other early automatics, because at this time there was a lot of research and development being done in early automatics. And amongst those early automatics that I bought a Rolex Bubbleback. And I like to wear the watches. But of all the early automatics that I wore, the Bubbleback was the only one that actually worked. That I could wear it for a couple of days and be sure that at the end of those 2 days it would still be running and it would be keeping more or less the right time. And that got me interested in Rolex. And I got interested in Rolex because there was so much crap talked about them then. I just wanted to know about Rolex, so I asked people who'd been in the vintage watch business for ages. I asked retailer jewelers. I said, "What can you tell me about Rolex?" And I got told it was owned by the mafia. I was told it was owned by the Roman Catholic Church, and I was wondering if there's a connection between the two of those, other than being Italian. And that was really funny, because Wilsdorf actually wrote his own biography. It's known as the Rolex Vademecum. And the first words in that Vademecum are, "I was born to a Protestant family in Bavaria." Now, Bavaria is very Catholic. Bavaria is known, to other Germans, Bavaria is known as the northernmost province of Italy. So he was brought up as a strict Lutheran Protestant. He was probably the only Protestant in his village. So I can be pretty sure that Rolex was never owned by the Vatican, even though a couple of popes have worn the damn things. So I just got interested, and it sucked me in. And the more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew. And so I just kept learning.
So when was this, James?
40 years ago. I'm older than I look. Next question.
How did you get the prototype watch, and if you sent it to Rolex, would they service that for you? And the old one that you had there?
I have a few prototypes, and I just got to know people. There's a small group of people who like the really weird shit, and we know each other. And to me, what makes something interesting is the story, so this is a pretty crappy looking Explorer. This is one of the first ones. It's 6150. We'll put it on the screen so we can see the dial. You can see this is a really crappy refinish dial, but it was refinished by the British government, because when this watch was first issued, it had a radium dial. And what's special about this one is, if we look at the back of it, it has Royal Navy marks. These Submariners, these 6150s, were the first ever watches issued to British naval divers. This watch has a CD mark on the back. It meant for clearance divers, guys who essentially blew up mines wearing frogman suits. You know, talk about balls the size of elephants. It's a crappy looking dial. It's okay, you know. It's got these engravings on the back, but what makes it really special is it comes with a piece of paper that says Rolex Admiralty Watch Type 6150. And the first lines on this instruction book, which you have to remember, when this was 53, it was still national service. People were sent into the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and told, this is what you're going to do, mate. The first lines are brilliant. This Admiralty Rolex watch Type 6150 is an expensive, high-precision instrument specially designed for the purpose for which it has been issued to you. So don't fuck it up. The last few words are implied in this sentence. You know, that's what I love. I've seen about 6 of these watches in my life. You guys had one recently. But I've never seen this paper. And to me, this paper is actually more interesting than the watch, because it talks about a time. You know, now everybody who's in the Navy, and particularly somebody who's doing clearance diving, super high qualified, they're doing that job for 18 months, 2 years, because they know that when they leave, they can get a job earning £250,000 a year. Then it was literally some jobber from the slums or from a farm. And this was how you talk to them. HS10 hydrographic survey, which is the department of the Admiralty that is to do with maps. And you think, well, why are watches anything to do with maps? Watches are to do with maps because watches were an important part of navigation. This was how, if you've read the book Longitude about John Harrison, timekeeping and navigation are inextricably mixed. So HS10, so hydrographic survey, map making department. Broad arrow means it belongs to the British government. CD means clearance diver, and that is the serial number of the watch. Right, Mike?
Sounds right.
No, he knows more about CD watches than I do.
I was going to say, it wasn't the one on eBay this week.
Pardon?
It wasn't the one that came off eBay this week.
No.
Turned up in the British Heart Foundation, still away, and they auctioned it this week on eBay for
Yeah.
7,200.
How much?
7,200.
That's bloody cheap.
Polished back and very scanty.
But was it still readable, the back?
No.
Ah, okay.
Photos weren't very good.
Yeah. Because I mean, I've seen these go for 30 grand.
There was one up in Scotland recently.
I reckon in today's market it's probably 18 to 20. But they've gone as high as 30. But again, none of them have ever gone with one of these. And you know, this is the weird shit I love. You know,
James, do you remember, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
this Panerai is one of those. Do you remember I came to you, must be
Yeah.
20 years ago, with the Rolex, the Panerai?
Yeah.
Remember that? So on one of my trips, I pulled a Panerai, and it happened to be a Rolex one. And it
Yeah.
was pretty valuable. I mean, we're
Well,
talking a lot of money,
from
15, 20 years ago.
yeah, from the birth of the brand up until 1970, all Panerai watches were actually made by Rolex. And in fact, if you look at them, this is essentially the Rolex Oyster pocket watch turned through 90 degrees. And the first Panerais that were sold, the first watches that Rolex sold to Panerai were actually 9-carat gold, because they were in fact converted pocket watches. And then they went on to make steel cases for them. But if you look here, you can see that the movement and the case are all signed Rolex.
So this was something we had
Yeah.
all those years ago. wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did Rolex stop supplying Panerai?
Sorry.
Did Panerai say they were going to do their own thing then in 70?
No, what happened was that by the end of the 60s, every other diver, because these were made only for the Italian Navy, they were made for the Italian Navy, the French Navy, and the Egyptian Navy. Those were the only customers that Panerai had. They didn't sell watches to the public. Every other naval diver was using submariners or blind pound 50 fathoms. They were using proper diving watches. These things were pretty crap at that because they're manually wound. They only run for a day. You don't know if there's no bezel on it for timing. So what Panerai did was they stopped using Rolex movements, and they used the movements from 8-day bedside clocks. And where at the 9 position, there was an indicator which showed the 8 days, so you knew the watch was running. Because the other thing about these watches, they don't have a second hand, so you don't know if it's running. And it's kind of important if you're diving, to know, not just to know what time it is, but to be sure that your damn watch is working. Yeah. See, a marked lack of seconds hands.
And this was the same time as the Dirty Dozen, or no, before that.
Oh, it's way before that, yeah. No. This dates from 36. The Dirty Dozen is commissioned in 44, delivered in 45, 46.
But already watches like that had second hand.
Oh yes, they all had second hands, yeah.
Could not be fitted with because it's the pocket watch.
The pocket watch movement did have a second hand, but it would have been at the 9 o'clock position. So I've no idea why they chose not to do it. Actually, of course, the Rolex model that was issued, the Rolex model that was produced, did have a second hand at 9 o'clock, but Panerai chose not to have one on their thing.
Anything to the loom, the double layer.
I've no idea. Yes, it would have been difficult to run the pinion through the double things, and this has got Italian Navy engraving. 10th Flotilla, and it's watch number 48. The 10th Flotilla were the Italian equivalent of kamikaze divers. Next, sir.
Can we look at this one? 'Cause
Yeah.
I like this one.
Going back to your
mentioning that the expedition was brought out in 1953.
Yeah.
Would it be a coincidence that that was when Mount Everest was conquered?
The Explorer was launched in 53 at about the same time as Everest was conquered. The Rolex watches that were worn on the expedition didn't go to the top. They went a good deal up, but they were not Explorers. But Rolex used pictures of the people on the expedition in Explorer advertising. They never actually say that they were at the top. What they just say, used by the Royal Geographical Society, British Army Everest expedition, used by the successful British Army Royal Geographic Society expedition, and they assume that people will make that leap. But it is not true that the Explorer went to the summit.
James, when was first Submariner?
First Submariner 53, same time.
Same time.
Yeah,
Which was 5508?
5504.
Yeah, 4.
Yeah.
What about the background?
Oh yeah. Another watch with a crappy dial. I think Mike knows more about the A6538s than I do.
No serial numbers on them.
Pardon?
No serial numbers.
No serial number between the lugs. Yeah.
Started life as a 6540 and then had the triple stripe on the back.
Yeah.
And then famously you get rid of Earth Dialway, which was reprinted by the MOD watchmakers at Earth 50 pieces.
No, the dials were reprinted by the Burford Dial Company.
Burford Dial Company, but
Yeah.
they actually supplied the tampon.
Ah, okay. Yeah. The
They've all got little tells that just repeat through all the dials.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a smudge in the crown, and then the 9 has got a little bit of a squiggle in it as well.
the story behind this watch was that the Royal Navy lost we withdrew from Empire, so we lost the great dockyards at places like Malacca and Singapore and Aden, where it was normal for the Navy to pull the ships in there to go to dry dock and to have the bottoms cleaned and all that stuff. It was decided that they would instead have 2 trained divers on every ship. So Rolex suddenly had a requirement for a few hundred diving watches. And so they went to Rolex. And Rolex supplied them with the new reference 6538, which had been tested in the Mediterranean by Mr. Rebikov, who was an independent diving contractor, but who worked very closely with Rolex. If you find an early Rolex Submariner brochure, you will see pictures of a guy, you know the image, Mike, the guy with the giant fish that he's speared. And the guy is 50 feet down in the Mediterranean, and he's wearing a pair of budgie smugglers and flippers and a mask and a snorkel. That's it. And the thing was that the subs were all tested in the Mediterranean. The watches were issued to British divers, and they were diving in the North Sea. And you don't go in the North Sea in a pair of budgie smugglers and a face mask. So they were wearing thick suits and thick gloves, and they couldn't operate the watch. They couldn't turn the bezel, they couldn't do anything. And the straps wouldn't fit round the big suits they were wearing. So they went back to Rolex and said, look, watch is great, but. So Rolex, what they did was they completely redesigned the case to take a completely different bezel, which had much wider grooves, so it's much easier to grab with when you're wearing gloves, and a much thicker glass. They changed from having the metal bracelet, they fitted fixed spring bars on it, and the fixed spring bars are not like modern military subs where the fixed spring bars are welded in position or soldered in position. With these, they were held in position by resin, and that enabled them to fit a long strap that would fit on anything. So a long fabric strap. I think the first straps were leather, weren't they, Mike? Yeah, the very first straps were long leather straps, like a NATO strap, but leather instead. They were fitted to the watches. The problem was that the British government, the Royal Navy, the Admiralty, I don't know who it was, but they were very cheap. And their attitude was, well, look, if all you're doing is changing the case, we'll keep the movements and dials and we'll reuse the movements and dials. And I have no idea who came up with this idea, but that's what happened. Literally, the Rolex sent over brand new cases, and the Hurstman so fitted the old movements. And what was really interesting was that these cases came without serial numbers. And the military, the Royal Navy, engraved the old serial numbers from the watch that the movement came out of. And that number was then engraved on the case back. Is that right, Mike? Yeah. But then the watches had an even weirder thing happen, which was that it was discovered how dangerous radium was. So the gorgeous dials they had on them, which were high gloss, black, shiny gilt dials, were sent to Burford, were given a quick rub over with a Brillo pad, and then they were stamped with this particularly crappy replica of the original dial. And these watches are, it's reckoned there may be 50 of them. They were a prototype for what became the 5513. The design of the bezel was then carried on for the 5512 and 5513. And when they proved these things worked, the Navy then ordered a bunch of 5513s and used those, which later then became the 5517. But this is the prototype Rolex Royal Navy diving watch.
Could that still be repaired or serviced?
Oh yeah, it's just it's a regular Rolex. When was the last time you had a 653? I mean, they have a crap movement. The 1030 movement is one of the worst movements Rolex ever made. And they only made it for a very short period. It was the first automatic that Rolex had designed from scratch as an automatic. It was a good movement for its time, but its time passed it pretty quickly. Next question.
Can I ask you, did Rolex ever get asked to do the Moon watch, which I know Omega did? Was it a competition?
There is the story that NASA, being a US government contractor, had to go out to tender on watches for the astronauts. But the astronauts had already been using the Omega Speedmaster. They knew it and they liked it. So the tender was written almost around the Omega Speedmaster. There was a Longines, there was a Rolex 6538, and what was the other one? There were 4 watches. Was one of them an American one? A Benrus or something? There were 4 watches in the tender. All of them failed somehow. Bulliver, yeah. All of them failed in one way or another, but it was decided they would go with the the Omega. But what was really interesting was that at the same time as the astronauts were doing the Mercury and the Gemini thing, at the same time, the US Air Force was running the X-15 program, which was ultra high speed. I think they're the fastest planes that ever flew up until the Blackbird. And those guys, several of the guys who flew the X-15 actually got astronaut wings because they actually went higher than some of the first orbital flights. And every single one of those guys wore a GMT master. Because in America, pilots wore GMT masters. It was just the way things were. And Air Force pilots certainly did. And every X-15 pilot wore a GMT master.
About Apollo 13, he said actually, so the story goes they timed every 14 seconds on their Speedmaster.
I don't remember, I'm sorry. I don't know much about Speedmasters.
No, but sorry, in the other book you wrote that what they actually used the timing was the GMT.
Yeah. That's what I have been told. I'm not sure how much of that holds up.
It's an odd thing with the marketing.
Pardon?
With the marketing, this concept of they sent watches to prisoners of war in World War II, that they didn't have to.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit mad to me. If they did that.
I don't think it was a marketing thing. There's an old saying is that there is no more devout Catholic than somebody who's converted. No more devout Jew than somebody who's converted.
More knowledge.
You've made it. The thing is, if you're born a Catholic or you're born British, it's there. It's always been there. But if you've made an elective choice, I went to university in America, and I remember having arguments with Americans about their constitution and things. And my closing line I would always use when I think I was winning the argument was, look, you were just born here. I fucking paid to come here, so I.
You have more of a right.
Yes. So
Fair enough.
Wilsdorf was a converted Briton. He was born a Bavarian, not a German, a Bavarian. And he made an elective choice. And if you look at the names of watches that Rolex launched in the 20s and 30s, the Prince, the Viceroy, the Princess, the Windsor, the Royal, they're all, he was very pro-British. And it was one thing he could do. You know, he was already in his very late 40s he was in his early 50s during the war. So he couldn't join up. Anyway, he's living in Switzerland, what's he going to do? So this was one thing he could do. And I think that's why it happened. What I found really interesting is over the years, I've owned about maybe 15 of those prisoner of war watches. Every single one had all the paperwork because it was really important to the guys who owned them, the whole story, the whole thing behind it. But it was wonderfully 1930s British. It was very classist. It was only British officers, never non-commissioned or private.